She was standing at my kitchen sink at 7 in the morning, eating toast she hadn't asked permission for, wearing my ex-wife's university hoodie, and the reason I know exactly what time it was is because the clock above the cooker said 7:04 and I had been staring at it for approximately 20 seconds without once looking at the clock. That's the first thing I'll tell you about that morning. Not that I was surprised, though I was, and not that I knew immediately that something was about to change, though some distant part of me did. The first thing I'll tell you is that I was standing in the doorway of my own kitchen holding an empty coffee mug and I had completely forgotten what I'd come in there to do. She hadn't heard me yet. She was facing the window, watching whatever early morning does to the back garden of a converted terrace in Redland, which is to say nothing remarkable, just damp grass and a neighbor's fence and the particular gray gold of Bristol in October. She had the toast folded in half. Not cut. Folded. Like a sandwich, but it was just toast, and she was eating it like that was the only logical structural solution, which I would later learn was exactly how she thought about it. The hoodie said Bristol 2009 across the back in faded block letters. I knew that hoodie. I had watched that hoodie get folded into a moving box 18 months ago. I had assumed, with the specific finality of a man who has learned not to dwell on things, that it was gone. Apparently not everything goes where you think it does. She turned around. I still hadn't filled the mug. Before I go any further, and I want to get back to her, if you're listening to this right now, wherever you are in the world, I need you to drop a comment and tell me where. I mean that genuinely. These stories have been traveling to places I couldn't have imagined when I started telling them, and every time I see a new location in the comments I think, there. Someone there heard this. It means more than I know how to say. All right. Let's go back. My name is Cal Deering. I'm 34. I live alone on the third floor of a converted Victorian terrace in Redland, Bristol, and I work in tech, which I say the way people say they're in finance or in logistics, as a shorthand that technically answers the question while conveying as little as possible about the actual work. The actual work. I'm a senior software infrastructure engineer at a mid-sized SaaS company with offices in Bristol and Edinburgh. What that means, in real terms, is that I spend my days making sure the invisible architecture underneath other people's products doesn't collapse. Not building features. Not shipping launches. Not giving talks about disruption at conferences where everyone wears lanyards. I'm the person who makes sure the lights stay on so that the people who do those things can keep doing them without noticing me. 3 monitors. A standing desk I use as a shelf. A Slack workspace with enough unread notifications to constitute a genuine mental health risk, which I manage by muting approximately 70% of the channels. I moved into the flat 2 years ago, after the marriage ended. I say it like that, the marriage ended, because it's the cleanest version, and after 2 years I've learned to prefer clean versions over accurate ones. The accurate version is that Nora and I were together for 5 years, married for 3 of them, and somewhere around year 4 we became the kind of couple who coordinate logistics efficiently and feel nothing about it. No affair. No betrayal. No single catastrophic event I could point to and say, there, that was the fault line. Just the long, quiet, almost respectful accumulation of 2 people growing in directions that didn't overlap, until one Sunday morning we were both sitting at the kitchen table with our separate coffees and our separate phones and we looked up at exactly the same moment and had, without a word, the same thought. We were kind about it. We remained kind. That, I think, was both the best and the strangest part. The divorce was cordial. The division of things was fair. She took the furniture I'd never been attached to and the hoodie I didn't know she'd taken and the potted orchid that had never once bloomed in 4 years of trying. I kept the flat, the AeroPress, a bookshelf of things I keep meaning to reread, and a specific quality of quiet that I have, over 2 years, slowly learned to value rather than merely tolerate. Not bitter. That's important. Not bitter. Just honest about what happened and how it shaped the particular version of myself that woke up that Tuesday morning expecting nothing. I had, by any reasonable measure, rebuilt something. Not dramatically. Not in a way that required announcing. I ran 3 mornings a week along the cut, past the houseboats in whatever weather. I made proper coffee. I had learned to cook 4 things well rather than everything badly. I had a plant, a monstera if you're curious, that was alive through genuine care rather than accident. I had friends. I had work that engaged me more than I admitted. I had Saturdays that belonged entirely to me and felt like a gift rather than a gap. I was, as of 7:03 that morning, settled. Not happy in the documentary sense. Not the kind of fine that's a polite substitute for struggling. The other kind, the kind with actual weight underfoot. The kind you don't fully appreciate until something walks into your kitchen and reminds you it's possible to feel unsteady again. The flat is the kind of place that rewards morning light and punishes morning indifference. Third floor, south-facing kitchen, sash windows that let in light from an angle that turns everything the particular color of very weak tea, which sounds unflattering but is, in practice, the only light I've ever lived with that makes the whole room feel like it's happening at a slight remove from urgency. Like there's a buffer between you and the day. The radiator under the kitchen window is original Victorian cast iron and it ticks when it heats up in a rhythm I've stopped hearing, the way you stop hearing the sound of your own building. The floorboards are wide pine, the kind that have been painted and sanded and repainted so many times they've accumulated a history visible in the grain. The kitchen smells in the mornings like coffee and old wood and the specific cool damp of a building that has been here for 140 years and intends to be here for another 140 without asking anyone's opinion about it. I had made this flat into something I was genuinely glad to come home to. That had taken time. That had required the specific project of choosing things. A shelf here, a lamp there, a rug that wasn't the one Nora would have chosen. In a way that accumulated, slowly, into a place that felt like mine rather than ours with her removed. I want you to understand that before I tell you about Faye. The flat mattered. The quiet mattered. The feeling of having constructed something livable out of what had, for a period, felt like empty square footage and ambient regret, that mattered. I'm not telling you it was threatened. I'm telling you it was real. Because what happened next only means anything if you know what was already there. Her name was Faye. Faye Callister. Nora's younger sister, 4 years between them, which made her 30. I knew her age because I had sat at a restaurant table 8 months ago at her birthday dinner. A dinner Nora had organized with the specific, slightly forced energy of someone determined to prove that adults can be civilized, and watched her navigate the particular awkwardness of an ex-husband at the table with a composure that I had, privately, found impressive. Here is what I knew about Faye before that morning. She was a freelance graphic designer working primarily in brand identity, the kind of work that sounds simple until someone like her explains it, at which point it becomes immediately clear that it is not simple at all. It is in fact a discipline with its own rigorous internal logic and considerable technical depth. She lived in Stokes Croft, about 1.5 miles from me, in a first-floor flat with a flatmate named Bex, about whom she had a range of opinions that ran the full spectrum from genuine affection to exasperated incredulity depending on what Bex had done that week. She had opinions about typefaces. Specific, considered, deeply held opinions about typefaces that she had once, at a Christmas dinner 3 years ago, articulated for 11 uninterrupted minutes while I listened and found, to my own surprise, that I was not bored. She drank white wine or black coffee, never both in the same sitting. She had been in a relationship that ended about a year ago. I knew this because Nora had mentioned it, not with any particular agenda, just as information, and she had not, as far as I was aware, been in one since. That was the inventory. That was the full picture of Faye Callister as she existed in my life before 7:04 a.m. on a Tuesday in October. Nora's sister. A person in my peripheral. Someone I knew adjacently and liked reasonably and placed, without much thought, in the clearly labeled box that the social geometry of a divorce assembles around the people who were always the other person's first. That was the category. I want to be clear about the category because the whole weight of what I'm about to tell you rests on understanding what that category felt like. Not as a rule I was aware of making but as a gravitational fact, the kind you don't question because it's never needed questioning. And then she turned around from my sink, and the categorization system I had been operating with for 4 years made a sound like a single note struck on something that had been slightly out of tune the whole time, and I noticed it and I put it away and I poured my coffee and I waited to find out what she needed. Her first movement before I knew who she was the thing I noticed. Not her face. Not her hair. The posture. The way she stood at the sink with her weight fractionally forward, on the balls of her feet, like someone who is temporarily stationary rather than settled. Alert in the way of people who are comfortable anywhere but at home nowhere. The specific self-possession of someone who has spent enough time in rooms that weren't theirs to have stopped apologizing for it without becoming careless. Then she turned and I knew her and everything got filed correctly. Dark hair, natural, cut practically, with a slight curl at the ends that I would later learn she considered an ongoing administrative problem. Warm brown eyes. A small scar along the edge of her left jaw, half an inch, pale, old, that I would look at several times over the next few weeks before I understood that I was looking at it. Not beautiful in the way that announces itself. In the way that accumulates, specifically, the more time you spend looking. The kind of face that reveals itself slowly and then, once it has, cannot be unseen. She caught me looking at the toast situation. More structural integrity, she said without hesitation. I opened my mouth, closed it again. Nora gave me a key, she added. That was the other part of the morning that I was going to need to process. She was Nora's sister. She was in my kitchen. She had folded her toast for structural reasons and was looking at me with an expression of complete, unhurried, undefensive calm. I made the coffee. What she needed was a favor, and the favor was this. She had been shortlisted for a brand identity contract. A significant one, the kind that would, if she won it, move her operation from competent freelancer with good clients to independent studio with a reputation. The client was a Bristol-based technology company, mid-sized, growing, the kind that had been using the same visual identity since 2014 and had finally noticed this was a problem. They had interviewed several designers. Faye had made the final 3. The pitch was in 4 days. The problem was not the design work. The design work was, she said, ready. The problem was that the pitch included a section on digital infrastructure. The client wanted to understand that their new design partner had genuine comprehension of their technical environment, not just aesthetic intuitions about it. The brief had been specific. They wanted brand work that would integrate coherently with their product architecture, and they wanted the designer they hired to demonstrate they understood what that meant. Faye understood what it meant in principle. She needed someone who could help her understand it in practice, in enough depth that she could speak fluently and accurately when the technical directors in the room started asking questions, rather than nodding along in a way that experienced engineers immediately recognized as borrowed vocabulary deployed without comprehension. She had tried to get this help from her flatmate Bex's boyfriend, who worked in IT support and had been, she said, extremely helpful in a way that was also completely wrong about everything, consistently with great confidence. She needed 2 hours. An engineer. Someone who could translate rather than teach. Someone who understood infrastructure at a real level and could help her find the language without the jargon. Nora had given her the key and told her to come before I left for my home office setup. She hadn't asked me in advance because, and this I found out later from Faye directly, who told it without embarrassment, she had assumed I would say no if asked in the abstract, and would say yes if she was already there. Which was, I realized, sitting across from her at the kitchen table with my coffee and my morning agenda rapidly restructuring itself, accurate. Here's what I should tell you about the moment of decision because it matters and it's small. The category. The social geometry. The quiet gravitational fact of Nora's sister as a label with weight and history and implication. All of that was present and I was aware of it, and the awareness was the texture of a hand on my shoulder saying, "Be careful here, this is not a neutral zone." And I looked at her across the table, at the laptop bag by her chair, the specific alert readiness of her posture even while seated, the absence of any artifice in how she was presenting herself or this request, and I thought, this is a reasonable thing that a person needs and that I can provide. That was the whole of it. Not brave. Not generous. Not a decision that I examined from 3 angles and chose with full cognizance of its implications. Just the obvious thing, stripped of the performances around it. I said, "Show me what you've got." She looked at me for a moment. Not surprised, recalibrating. She'd prepared for a different version of this conversation. The resistance version. The polite excuse version. The version where I checked my calendar and found that I was, regrettably, fully committed. "Just like that," she said. "It's a pitch deck," I said. 2 hours. "I've been doing this for 10 years. She put the toast down. She unzipped the bag. She produced a laptop, mid-range, stickered, the stickers all typographic, one of which said "Trust the Grid" in a typeface I couldn't name, and she opened it and set it on the table and sat up straight with the specific focused energy of someone switching modes. "Thank you," she said. 2 words. No ornament. No qualification. Just, thank you with the direct weight of a person who means exactly what they say and doesn't need it witnessed. Something in the room shifted. Not visibly. Not dramatically. The radiator kept ticking. The coffee kept cooling. The October light kept doing its pale gold nothing through the sash window. But something that had been held at a specific angle was put down. We worked for 2 hours and 23 minutes. She asked precise questions. She pushed back once, correctly, when I oversimplified a technical relationship, and she'd read the client brief closely enough to know the simplification was misleading. She said I don't follow that when she didn't follow something, without any trace of embarrassment, and waited for me to find a better way in rather than nodding forward. Her questions had the internal logic of someone who thinks structurally about everything, not just what something was but how it connected to the next thing and why the connection mattered. At 9:20 she closed the laptop. "That's everything," she said. Genuinely. "That's the difference between that pitch working and not working." "You would have found your way to it," I said. "Maybe," she said. "Not in 4 days. And not this clean." She stood to leave. I walked her to the door in the way that is just a normal social behavior and doesn't require examination. At the door she stopped and looked back once at the kitchen. "I like your flat," she said. "It feels like someone actually chose everything in it." Then she left. I stood in the hallway for slightly longer than necessary. From the kitchen the AeroPress was sitting on the counter with the second cup she'd made without asking. Mine left there, still warm. I should have dealt with what that meant then. I didn't. She got the contract. I found out not from her but from Nora, which was itself a small archaeological event. Nora and I communicated in the functional minimalist way of two people who have decided to remain decent to each other and are mostly succeeding, short messages about logistical things, cordial and efficient and carrying none of the weight of what had been. The text said, "Faye got the pitch. Just thought you should know since you helped." And then, after a pause of about 3 minutes that I imagine involved some consideration, "That was kind of you, by the way." I read it twice. Then I wrote back, "Good. She earned it." And went back to work. But I was thinking about it for the rest of the afternoon in a proportion entirely mismatched to the content. Not the news, the phrasing. "Just thought you should know." As though Nora had, in some quiet peripheral way, noticed something that I was not yet willing to notice myself. Or as though she was doing something deliberate and deniable. I couldn't decide which. I filed it in the category of things I was going to leave alone and turned back to my screens. 3 weeks later, Faye texted me directly. "Hey, this is Faye. Hope it's okay that I have your number. Nora gave it to me. I wanted to say thank you properly rather than just leaving you to your Tuesday morning. Coffee?" I sat with this message for an embarrassing length of time. Not because I was uncertain. The uncertainty was not, actually, the dominant experience. The dominant experience was something more like watching a variable you've been tracking move in a direction you'd predicted without quite admitting you were predicting it, and the combination of recognition and the awareness of recognition creating a compound that I didn't have a clean word for. Was fine. Coffee with Nora's sister, who I had helped with something as a gesture of thanks. Normal. Unremarkable. The kind of social interaction that happens between adults constantly without requiring narrative significance. I said yes. She chose a small place on White Ladies Road. I'd walked past it 100 times without going in. Narrow, good light, the kind of cafe that attracts people doing solitary work and occasional low-key conversations. All the tables slightly too close together in a way that felt intimate rather than crowded. She was already there when I arrived, which I would later come to recognize as simply a fact about her. She was always early, not in the anxious way of someone trying to make a good impression but in the quietly preferential way of someone who likes being in rooms before they fill, likes the specific quality of a space before it's shaped by collective occupancy. She had a flat white in front of her and a notebook open on the table, which she closed, one smooth deliberate motion as I sat down. I noticed the closing. "I ordered you one," she said. "Flat white. Is that?" "That's fine." She tilted her head. "You say fine in a particular way." "What way?" "Like it's a container for something larger." She picked up her cup. "Most people use it as a filler. You use it as a full stop." I looked at her. She looked back with the expression of someone who has said a thing they meant and is not especially concerned about how it lands. "Good coffee," I said after a moment. That was a deliberate subject change. "Yes." She smiled, not triumphant, just accurate, the smile of someone who called a thing correctly and doesn't need to make a performance of it. We talked for an hour and 50 minutes. I know the duration because I had a call at 2 and checked my watch and felt, in a way I noted without examining, that the call was an intrusion rather than an appointment. She walked me through the pitch in detail, not to impress me with the outcome but with genuine analytical interest in the mechanics. What had landed, what had almost failed, where she'd had to improvise against the specific personality of one of the technical directors who'd tried to wrong-foot her. She talked about it with the specific engaged intelligence of someone who learns forward, who wants to understand what worked so she can do it again, rather than just accept that it worked and move on. I asked her what the client was like. Careful, she said. Not in a bad way. The kind of careful that comes from having been burned by people who talked well and delivered poorly. They asked hard questions to see if I'd hedged. I didn't hedge. What did you do instead? Told them what I didn't know and what I'd find out. How did that land? Better than if I'd pretended. She looked at her coffee. People who are careful always know when they're being managed. The only thing that works on them is being direct. I thought about that. You're describing yourself. She considered. Maybe. A bit. She asked about my work then, actually asked the kind of follow-through questioning that means someone is listening rather than waiting for their turn. When I explained what infrastructure engineering actually looked like at a practical level, the invisible architecture, the maintenance of systems that everyone depends on and nobody thinks about, she said. So you're the person making sure the building doesn't fall down so everyone else can focus on the furniture. Something like that. And when the building does fall down? Everyone discovers very quickly that they don't actually care about the furniture. She laughed, real, unperformed, the laugh of someone who found something genuinely amusing rather than socially convenient. How long does it usually take? About 45 seconds into the outage. And then I become, briefly, the most important person in several different Slack channels simultaneously. She was smiling still. That's an interesting kind of power. It's not power, I said. It's just visibility. They forget me again in about an hour. She looked at me in a way that held for a second longer than necessary. Do you mind that? I thought about it properly, which I hadn't been asked to do before. No, I said. I prefer it. I'm not interested in being noticed. I'm interested in the work being right. Something crossed her expression, a small consideration, not quite a smile. I believe that, she said. Which is either a compliment or I've been talking to too many people who are primarily interested in being seen and I've lost calibration. Which do you think? She picked up her cup. Both probably. That landed. In the specific way that things land when they're precise rather than intended, when someone is just telling you something true about what they see and the truth of it sits in the chest with a small, surprised weight. I walked home afterward in the October gray and thought about nothing in particular and everything at once, which is the specific mental weather of a person who is not yet ready to name what they're thinking about. 2 weeks later, she texted about contract law. Did I know anyone who could walk her through standard freelance IP clauses? And I said I knew a friend who'd navigated the same thing, a solicitor named Dan who owed me a conversation, and somehow this turned into the three of us at a pub in Gotham on a Wednesday evening where Dan, being Dan, was absorbed into a conversation about a football match with someone at the adjacent table within 20 minutes and it was just Faye and me at the end of the bar for an hour and a half before either of us thought to check. She had a glass of white wine. She had the notebook. She was sketching something on the corner of a page, a logo, something that had arrived in her head and needed to get out before it dissolved, small, precise, unhurried, one eye on the sketch and one eye on the conversation. Sorry, she said when she caught me watching. I do this. The idea either gets out or it's gone by morning. Don't stop. She kept going. I watched her work without watching her work, the way concentration changes the face, the way her grip shifted between construction and detail, the handwriting that appeared beside the sketch in the corner. Lowercase, fast, almost perfectly even. Like her voice, actually. Consistent. Not performing anything. The company you work for, she said, not looking up, do they have a brand identity that means anything to them? They have a logo. That's not what I asked. No, I said. I don't think they do. Not consciously. She nodded. Made a small mark. I can always tell when I walk into a company whether the brand was a decision or an accident. The ones that were accidents are always surprised when I tell them what they've been inadvertently communicating. What are they inadvertently communicating? Usually something about what they think of their clients. She looked up. You can tell a lot about what an organization believes about the people it's trying to reach by how it presents itself. Not what they say they believe. What the design says. And companies don't know they're saying it. Almost never. She tilted her head at the sketch. Which is, depending on how you feel about it, either an opportunity or a diagnosis. Which do you feel it as? She looked at me steadily. Both. Usually at the same time. The pub was loud, A Friday energy crowd at the bar, someone's birthday at a table near the door, the specific wall of sound that doesn't impede conversation as much as it isolates it, makes the small space of two people talking feel sealed off from the rest of it. What made you go into design? I asked. She considered this with the same genuine attention she gave everything. I noticed things, she said. Before I knew there was a word for it or a job for it. I noticed when things were arranged wrongly. When type was wrong for its purpose. When a color did something the person using it hadn't intended. She paused. It felt like being able to read something other people were writing without knowing it. A second language. More like the language underneath the language. I moved my glass an inch to the left for no particular reason. Then I moved it back. She didn't comment. What about infrastructure engineering? She said. What about it? Same question. It's less poetic, I said. I like systems. I like understanding how things connect. I like knowing why something fails and fixing it before it does. I thought about it. I suppose I like the invisibility, actually. The infrastructure working correctly is indistinguishable from it not being there. That's the goal. Make it so good nobody knows it exists. She was looking at me with the still quality she had sometimes, absorbing rather than responding. That's the goal of good design too, she said quietly. The design that works is the one you don't consciously notice. It just feels right without you knowing why. We might be describing the same job, I said. We might, she said. From opposite ends. The ice in her glass shifted. Dan returned briefly, discovered we were mid-conversation, and tactfully found somewhere else to be. She didn't notice him return or leave. I did. I noted that I'd noticed. The third meeting was the one where I stopped pretending the pattern was coincidence. She texted on a Saturday, a proper October Saturday, the kind with low cloud and the suggestion of rain and the smell of something autumnal coming through the gaps in windows, and said, Arnolfini has a documentary photography show on this afternoon if you find yourself at a loose end. The sentence had 5 different exits built into it. If you find yourself at a loose end. The institution rather than an invitation. The afternoon rather than a specific time. The kind of message that can be responded to in 4 different ways without any of them meaning anything irrevocable. I replied, what time? She sent a time. I met her there. We walked around the exhibition for 50 minutes without talking very much, which I would previously have found uncomfortable and didn't. She would stop at something and I would stop with her and she would look at it in that way she had, tilted slightly, taking it in with the specific patience of someone for whom looking is a professional practice and a personal one simultaneously, and sometimes she would say something and I would think about it and sometimes she would just move on and I would follow, and the not talking was full rather than empty, the kind of quiet that has texture to it. At a photograph near the back, a woman alone at a table by a window, morning light, nothing dramatic about it, nothing intended, she stood for a long time. Long enough that I looked at the photograph and then at her and then back at the photograph trying to see what she was seeing. What is it? I asked. She was quiet for a moment. The window takes up most of the frame, she said. The woman is off-center. Most photographers would have moved closer, made her the subject. This one trusted the space around her. Pause. The emptiness is the point. It's not about what's there. It's about what she's sitting next to. I looked at the photograph again. Then at her. You're not talking about composition. A longer pause. No, she said. Quietly. Not entirely. She walked on. I stood there for a moment longer. Then I followed. On the waterfront afterward, the light was doing something specific. Late afternoon in autumn, that angle that turns water the color of old mirrors, and we walked without a decided direction, both of us with hands in pockets, the pavement narrow enough that our arms occasionally aligned for a half second before the space readjusted us. Can I ask you something direct? She said. Yes. Does this feel strange to you? She gestured with one hand, half pocket, the vague gesture of someone indicating everything rather than something specific. This. The fact that we keep. She left the sentence incomplete, not from uncertainty but because the sentence didn't need finishing. I think about it, I said. And I think it's complicated. I don't mean bad. I mean there are things around it. The Nora thing. Among others. She nodded. Not dismissively, she was weighing it. I had learned already that she weighed things rather than bounced off them. I've thought about the Nora thing, she said. I've thought about it more than I've thought about most things recently. Her voice was even, unhurried. They've been divorced for 2 years. She's with Patrick. She's actually happy, which I know because I know what her pretending to be happy looks like, and this isn't it. Pause. I'm not asking you to ignore it. I want to be honest that I don't think the geometry is as immovable as it might look. I was quiet for a moment. I'm not pretending not to notice, I said. I know. I want to be careful. With Nora? With you. A beat. Just the water and the light and a cyclist passing behind us, and the distance of maybe 2 feet of pavement between us. She looked at me for long enough that I became aware of the specific quality of being looked at by her. Not uncomfortably, not appraisingly, just fully. The way she looked at photographs. Okay, she said. Quiet. Even. The specific intonation of someone who has heard something and is choosing to hold it with both hands. Okay. We walked back in the darkening, our arms aligned for slightly longer than necessary on the narrow stretch by the water, and neither of us commented on it. Hold on. I have to stop for a second, not from the story, just to ask you something. Where in the world are you listening to this right now? Drop it in the comments, the city, the country, wherever you are. People are finding these stories in places I genuinely never expected, and every time I see a new location down there I feel something I can't accurately describe other than grateful. Subscribe if you haven't yet. There is another story coming next week and I promise you it will find you. Okay, I'm back. And so is she. First, to return a book she'd borrowed. I had no memory of lending it, a slim collection of essays about urban architecture that I'd mentioned once at the Arnolfini and apparently followed up by texting her a photo of the cover, which was something I had done and then apparently deleted from my own memory as a form of self-protection. She returned it with a post-it note attached to the inside cover. 4 words in her lowercase hand, Chapter 3. You probably. I read Chapter 3 and then sat with it for a while and decided not to examine the accuracy. Second, in a rainstorm. She was nearby, walking back from a client meeting in Clifton, and her umbrella inverted in the wind in a way that she described as both embarrassing and structurally predictable, and she texted asking if she could wait it out. This was so normal a request, so genuinely reasonable and logistically sensible, that the fact of it making me set the phone down and stare at the ceiling for 8 seconds was information I could not productively act on. She came up. I was already cooking. Pasta, simple, the kind of thing that feeds 2 without requiring adjustment. I didn't make a point of it. She sat at the table and opened her laptop and worked while I finished, and then we ate and I opened wine and she told me about the client meeting. The client was changing the brief. Again. 3rd time, she said. What do you do? Document everything and charge for revisions. Does it work? Financially. It doesn't stop them doing it again. What stops them doing it again? She thought about it. Usually they stop when they realize they're paying for the time it takes to change their mind. Until then, they think changing their mind is free. It never is, I said. She looked at me over her wine glass. Something about the phrasing had caught for a moment. No, she agreed. It never is. The rain was still at the windows. The lamp in the corner made the room amber. She had her feet tucked under her on the chair. Unconsciously, the specific comfort of a person who has stopped noticing they're in someone else's space because they no longer experience it as someone else's space. I noticed this. I noted it as information and set it down. At one point I said something about a project at work, an infrastructure overhaul we'd been procrastinating on, and she said, without looking up from whatever she was reading, "Why are you procrastinating on it?" Because the right solution requires temporarily breaking things that are currently working. She looked up. Is the current working version good? It's fine. She tilted her head. There's that word. It's functional, I said. It does what it needs to do. It's not what it could be. A beat. Yes, she said. I understand that. We both looked at each other. Outside, something down the street, a gust, a badly secured gate, made a noise that broke the particular charge of the moment, and she looked away first, back to her screen, and I took both plates to the sink and ran the water and neither of us said anything for a while. She left at 11. At the door she stopped, one hand on the frame and turned. Cal? Yeah. Something behind her expression moving forward. Nothing, she said. Quietly. Thank you for dinner. She left. I stood in the hallway for longer than I'd stood anywhere in recent memory. The third near confession happened in the kitchen. It was always the kitchen. I don't know why, something about that room, the light, the counter where she'd first stood, the AeroPress we kept making coffee with. Maybe it was just that the kitchen is the room where people stop performing and start being, and we had both, at some point, stopped performing entirely. She was helping me troubleshoot a bitter extraction. I had been making coffee in this flat for 2 years and I knew the variables: grind size, water temperature, brew time, pressure. But something had shifted in the last week and every cup was off, and it was bothering me in the disproportionate way that small domestic wrongnesses bother people who have otherwise ordered their lives correctly. She had strong opinions about this, it turned out, because she had strong opinions about everything that involved precision and process and the gap between what should work and what actually does. We were both leaning over the counter at the same angle, looking at the setup, and I was talking through the variables and she was listening and occasionally redirecting, and we were close. Not significantly close, just the close of two people working on the same small physical problem in a small physical space. And she said, very quietly, not turning her head, "I keep waiting for this to stop feeling like the most important part of my week." Her voice was completely even. Factual. The tone of someone making a practical observation about a thing they've been measuring. I stopped talking. The kitchen was very still. "Does it?" I said. My own voice was steady, which genuinely surprised me. "No," she said. I looked at the side of her face. She was still looking at the counter. "Me neither," I said. She turned her head then. We were very close. The October morning was doing its pale gold thing through the sash window. The AeroPress was between us on the counter and neither of us was looking at it. My phone rang. The sound was so aggressively, cosmically wrong. A work number, a deployment alert, a Sunday morning infrastructure crisis in full fluorescent Slack urgency, that I closed my eyes for approximately 1 second and thought several things in rapid sequence, none of which were technical. "You should get that," she said. Not bitter. Just accurate. The specific resignation of a person who has learned that timing is rarely cooperative. "I should," I said. I answered it. She made the coffee, both cups without comment, and set mine on the counter and moved to the sofa with her own. By the time the call was resolved, 22 minutes, a misconfigured deployment, nothing that couldn't wait but everything that couldn't be ignored, the moment had breathed itself out. She was reading something on her phone. The coffee was still warm. But it had been said. Both of us. Unambiguously. Without the exits that had been built into every previous version. No more pretending. November. The specific November of Bristol, not the dramatic kind with storms and statements, just the long, committed, slightly oppressive gray of a city that does low cloud better than anywhere I've ever lived. Cold that gets in at floor level. Radiators working harder than they should have to. The kind of month that makes the inside of a well-lit flat feel genuinely significant. She came on a Saturday afternoon to do a dry run of her formal presentation. The full brand identity delivery to the client was Monday, and she wanted to walk through the complete deck in front of someone who would engage rather than just validate. I was, she said, the only person she knew who had both the technical context and the specific unwillingness to be encouraging for its own sake. I took that as the compliment I was fairly certain it was. She stood at the end of the kitchen table and presented the whole thing, 40 minutes, start to finish, every decision unpacked, every strategic choice explained in its own terms. It was extraordinary work. The kind of work that has a logic so complete it reads as inevitable, which is the hardest thing to do and the thing most people mistake for simplicity. The typography alone, she spent 8 minutes on the typography alone, was a thing I understood at a gut level 3 minutes before I understood why I understood it. I sat back in the chair and watched her present and was aware, with a clarity that I had stopped trying to obscure, that I had been watching her for the full 40 minutes and almost none of that watching had been about the deck. She finished, closed the laptop, looked at me. "Well," she said. "It's the best work you've done," I said. "That you've shown me. You've only seen 2 pieces." "I know." She looked at me for a moment. Then she said, "What?" "Nothing. Cal." Her voice was quiet and direct and completely without pressure. "What?" I had been running the calculation for 2 months. The version of this that was a bad idea, the version that complicated things, the version that required Nora's knowledge and the social geometry and the quiet ongoing scrutiny of a situation that had never needed examining before I arrived in it. I had run it forward and backward and through every conditional I could construct. I kept getting the same result. "I've been trying to find the version of this that doesn't work," I said. For 2 months. She went very still. Her hands were on the closed laptop. And, she said. And I can't find it. I looked at her. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I'm saying I've stopped being willing to keep looking. She looked at me for a long time. Her expression did the thing. The stilling, the opening, the sequence I'd had 2 months to learn and not nearly enough time to stop finding remarkable. You want to know what I've been doing for 2 months? She said. Tell me. I've been folding my toast, she said, and thinking about the fact that you noticed and didn't say anything for 3 weeks, and then you helped me without making me feel like a favor, and you listened like I was saying things worth hearing, and you moved the chair out before I sat down without making a point of it, and you've never once, not once, made me feel like the complicated option. Her voice was even. The voice of someone reading a list they've compiled carefully, making sure they get it right. You just treated me like the obvious one. The radiator ticked. I stood up. Can I said. 3 words. The full weight of 2 months in 3 syllables. She looked at me. Something in her expression resolved. The specific resolution of a question that has been held for a long time finally being set down. Yes, she said. I crossed the room. I put my hand against the side of her face, fingertips at her jaw, the small pale scar I had been thinking about since October, and I kissed her once, gently. A question that had waited long enough to deserve being asked properly. Careful. Deliberate. Present. She kissed me back. Then her hands came up and found the front of my shirt, and the second kiss was nothing like the first. Not careful, not tentative, not a question. An answer that had been composing itself for 8 weeks and had run out of patience. The laptop slid an inch on the table. Outside, the November rain had begun doing its thing, not dramatically, just steadily, the rain of a city that commits to its weather, and from 2 floors below us, a television was on too loud, and from somewhere on the street, a car alarm cycled through its full indignant repertoire for 20 seconds and then gave up. We pulled back. She was slightly breathless. So was I, though I wasn't going to be the first to acknowledge it. She pressed her forehead to mine and laughed, small, genuine, disbelieving in the best possible way. 2 months, she said. 2 months, I agreed. You could have just. So could you. She pulled back to look at me properly. I did. At the waterfront. That was not conclusive. It was an opening. It had 4 exits. She stared at me. You counted the exits? I'm an engineer. I assess systems. She opened her mouth to respond to this, and then, from somewhere below us, indeterminate, possibly the first floor flat, possibly the communal hallway, possibly the specific chaos of a Victorian building that has never once behaved itself, came the sound of something large and metal being dropped onto a hard floor. Enormous. Completely absurd. The kind of noise that in any other context would require investigation. We both stopped. Looked at each other. Held the dignity of the moment for approximately 3 seconds. Then we didn't. If that just went somewhere in your chest, tell me where in the world you're watching from. Drop it in the comments. People are finding these stories from every corner I can think of and plenty I can't, and I want to know your corner specifically. Subscribe if you haven't. New stories every week, and I mean it when I say you won't want to miss them. Now, let me finish this. There were conversations I had been putting off. The Nora conversation was the one I'd been constructing in my head for weeks. Various versions, various approaches, various degrees of awkwardness, and the version in my head had involved raised voices or a long charged silence or some variant of how could you, and the reason I know this is because the actual conversation bore no resemblance to any of them. I called her on a Wednesday. Not because I needed permission, that's important, I want to be clear about that, but because she was owed honesty and I was capable of providing it, and the decent thing and the difficult thing were, in this instance, the same thing. She picked up on the second ring. I need to tell you something, I said. I'd rather you hear it from me. Pause. Not long. Is it Faye? She said. I stopped. Cal, she said, and her voice was, not warm exactly, but not the thing I'd been bracing for either. Something more complicated and more adult than I'd given her credit for. I gave her your number. I gave her the key. I know. I didn't do that without thinking about what it might mean. I didn't have an immediate response to that. I need a minute, she said. Not to be angry. Just to actually feel it instead of just say it's fine. Take as long as you need. I know her, Nora said quietly. I know you. I'm not going to tell you it doesn't feel strange. It does. But strange and wrong aren't the same thing. We stayed on the phone for a while after that, not about this, about other things, the functional ongoing things that don't go away, and when we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table and felt, with some genuine surprise, that the weight I'd been expecting to carry was not as heavy as I'd built it to be. Not gone. Present. But manageable. Human-sized. The minute Nora needed turned out to be about 3 weeks. Her text arrived on a Thursday. Dinner? All 3 of us. I'm choosing the restaurant. I'm not doing this weird and I'm also not doing it sober, so somewhere with a wine list. A pause, then, I mean it about the wine list. I showed Faye the text. She read it. Set the phone down. Sat with it for a moment. She's remarkable, she said. She is, I said. I've been less kind to her than she deserves sometimes. In my head. Because it was easier then, she stopped. Then what? Then admitting that the situation is actually complicated and nobody's the villain. I looked at her. She looked back. Outside, it was raining with the same neutral commitment November had been bringing for 3 weeks. You don't need me in that conversation, I said. I know. Pause. I'm going to have it anyway. Good. Stop being sensible about everything, she said. It's annoying. Fine, I said. She looked at me. There's that word. The dinner was a Friday in December, a Thai place in Clifton that Nora had chosen with the specific energy of someone exercising a minor but deliberate advantage, since Faye had called the restaurant overrated at some point in the preceding year and Nora had not forgotten. The 3 of us sat there for 2.5 hours. It was not effortless. No reasonable account of it could describe it as effortless. But it was real and it was honest, and at no point did anyone perform something they didn't mean. At one point Nora said, with the particular tone of an older sister who has decided to stop pretending she doesn't have opinions, I always thought Faye ended up with people who were either too uncomplicated or too dramatic. Never the middle. The middle being? Faye said. Nora looked at me briefly. Someone who notices things and doesn't announce it. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then Faye said, You've been workshopping that line. For 2 weeks, Nora admitted. I laughed. The table laughed. The restaurant continued doing restaurant things around us. When we left, Nora hugged Faye on the pavement outside. A real hug, duration and everything, and over Faye's shoulder she met my eyes and gave me a look I'd learned to read over 5 years together and still knew how to interpret. It said, Don't waste it. I held the look for a second. Then I nodded. Faye and I walked home through the December cold, her arm through mine, both our hands in my coat pocket. She was quiet for a while, processing, and I let her. Eventually she said, Was it terrible? No, I said. Was it fine? I looked at her. It was better than fine, I said. She pressed slightly closer against my arm as we walked, and the city went on being the city around us. Wet pavements, shop windows, the particular night sounds of Bristol doing its Bristol things, and we walked without hurrying because there was nowhere we needed to be other than where we were. We were already there. 6 months after the kitchen. She had a drawer. I had a key that lived on a hook by her front door and had been placed there by her without announcement on a Sunday in February. Neither of us had commented on either development. They had simply arrived the way the right things do, not because anyone decided them but because the alternative had stopped making sense. She left a specific hand cream on my bathroom shelf. The small tube with the orange label, the one she used every morning, that I had watched her use so many times it was now simply a fact of the bathroom the way the light fixture was a fact of the bathroom. I moved it once, not intentionally, just tidying, and it felt briefly wrong and I moved it back and I noticed I'd moved it back and I stood there for a moment in the bathroom with a mild expression of recognition. Not X. Just that. Whatever that word is. 14 months. She was working late in the spare room, which was now functionally her room in the way that rooms become rooms. The light was better, the desk fit, the books that accumulated there were hers, the plant on the windowsill was a cutting from the monstera she'd brought over the previous spring that had rooted with more enthusiasm than either of us had predicted. I brought her tea at 10:30. She didn't look up from the 3 browser tabs and the notebook with the lowercase fast even writing. She was deep in the problem, the particular focused depth that meant she'd been there for a while and had stopped noticing the world outside the screen. I set the tea down. Her hand found mine for exactly 1 second. Fingers pressing once, then releasing. She still didn't look up. I went back to the living room and sat with my book and didn't read it for a while. I thought about what she'd said at the waterfront the first time, I'm not asking you for anything. And I thought about how that had changed, not because she'd wanted more but because more had become the only natural shape of the thing. Good, I thought, which in the internal language I had been developing was carrying something considerably heavier than the word. 22 months. Kitchen. Morning. She was at the counter making coffee. She had learned the AeroPress better than me now, never admitted this, and I was at the table with my second cup and the news I'd already read and the particular Saturday stillness of a flat that feels exactly the right size. She was eating toast, folded in half. I watched her eat it and thought about the first morning, the faded hoodie, the October light, the extractor fan clicking in the background, the specific quality of standing in a doorway and forgetting what you'd come in for. I thought about the 2 months of careful, the waterfront, the photographs, the AeroPress, all of it. The accumulated weight of small moments in a life that had once felt very efficiently quiet and now felt like a different thing entirely. I had a ring in the bedroom drawer. I'd had it for 6 weeks. I had been waiting for a right moment, which I understood finally to be a fiction. Not because there was no right moment, but because every morning with her in my kitchen eating structurally reinforced toast was the right moment, and I had been waiting for something that was already here. Faye, I said. She looked up. I said, do you remember the first thing you said to me? She thought for exactly 1 second. More structural integrity, she said. Right. I picked up my coffee. Put it down again. I've been thinking about that. About structural integrity. What it actually means, something designed so it holds together under pressure without needing anyone to notice it's holding. She was very still. Is this going where I think it's going? She said. I think we're structurally sound, I said. I think we're the kind of thing that holds. I looked at her. I want to keep finding out. A long pause. In the bedroom drawer there was a ring, simple, specific, a thin band in a warm gold she'd once pointed out on someone else's hand and then immediately looked away from, which I had filed and kept. I went and got it. I came back. I held it out. No knee, no setup, just us in the kitchen on a Saturday morning with the light doing its pale gold thing and the radiator ticking and the AeroPress warm on the counter. Her eyes went to the ring, then to me. You've been waiting for the right moment, she said. I've been waiting for a Tuesday, I said. She looked at me. The particular looking, still open, the sequence I'd had 22 months to learn and still found remarkable every time. She took the ring. She put it on. Yes, she said. The same word as the kitchen in November. The same voice, factual, even, direct, carrying the full weight of something that doesn't need ornament. We stood in the kitchen in the Saturday morning with the toast going cold and the coffee going warm and nothing about it was anything other than entirely, completely, privately ours. Now when people ask us how we met, we have 2 versions. The long version requires good wine and the kind of evening that doesn't have anywhere to be. You're welcome to it, you've just had it. The short version is what we say at dinner parties and over coffee and in the casual moments when someone asks the question and we've both learned to love the brevity of the answer. She broke into his kitchen. I had a key. She was eating my toast. It had structural integrity. Every time the same beat. Every time, someone looks between us with the expression of a person who suspects there is considerably more to the sentence than the sentence contains. There is. There always was. If you made it to the end of this one, thank you. Genuinely, from wherever I'm telling this to wherever you're hearing it. These stories go further than I ever planned, and every single time I see a new place in the comments I feel something I don't have a clean word for. Grateful doesn't cover it. It's closer to, astonished that something this ordinary can find its way to you. Drop a comment and tell me where in the world you're watching from. I read every one. Every location. Every time. If this story found you at the right moment, subscribe. A new one arrives every day. They're all true in the ways that matter. I'll see you in the next one.